And welcome to the panel on implementing and promoting diversity in mergers and acquisitions. I'm Julia Carroll. I'm with the Watermill Group. Watermill is a 43-year-old private investing firm located in Boston. And we invest in companies that are ripe for growth and need a little extra support to get there. You know, they're at a crossroads and need strategic and operating support. And we've launched an initiative to invest in gender diverse teams. So it is such a privilege to be here with this really tremendous group of ladies to talk about diversity and promoting and implementing diversity. You know, the main topic of conversations this year have been COVID, the weather, which has become very extreme, and diversity has become a really increasingly important thing in our industry, which was led in part by the Black Lives Matter movement, but has been this global trend towards an awakening or an expansion of our understanding of how diversity impacts every facet of our lives. So we're here to talk about specifically how it impacts mergers and acquisitions. And I'm really pleased to introduce these ladies, or to have them introduce themselves. So why don't we go clockwise from what I can see? And Melissa, would you please start with an introduction?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Great to be here today. My name is Melissa Mounts. I'm a managing director at GTCR, and I focus on our leadership and diversity and inclusion. Most of my role is externally facing into our portfolio with our investment teams and our senior leaders, and a lot of emphasis as well with our boards. And I live in Chicago.
And Julie?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with all of you. Congratulations to those who are receiving such a great honor today. It's just so phenomenal, and I've loved every panel I've seen so far today. So I'm Julie Kampf. I am the founder and CEO of JBK Associates International. We're a women-owned certified retained executive search firm. I've been doing diversity recruiting for 20 years. My firm's going to close out our 18th year at the end of April. And we work across the U.S. And also globally, based in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. And looking forward to a wonderful panel discussion.
Dina?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dina Jalbert. I'm the founder and CEO of Align Business Advisory Services. We are a lower middle market mergers and acquisitions intermediary headquartered in Orlando, but we have a national presence working with businesses that I always like to say are too big to be small and too small to be enterprise, and helping them find their right home.
That's great. Well, it is 11:03, so we have 27 minutes to have this discussion. I'm going to encourage anyone who is participating to type questions in the chat box on the right so that we can address them towards the end. But before we get started, you know, one of the main things I'd like us to tackle is, what is diversity? You know, this is something that's come up in every panel. It's come up in every conversation today, and yet it's a very nebulous concept. So how does our panel define for themselves diversity?
So I can get started, Julia. As we're looking across three areas, our investment team and firm, our portfolio companies, and our boards, we're focused on a broad definition of diversity with ethnic and also gender, but especially gender. Private equity, I think that's just a very strong focus area for the industry in general. So as we're really putting forth a lot of our thoughts and implementing our initiatives, we're focused quite a bit on female diversity. At the board level, we are also taking a very broad definition of diversity in terms of the backgrounds and the experiences, looking at the customers that our portfolio companies serve, and ensuring that we have a spectrum of voices around that boardroom table. So it really depends on the context, but I think that, you know, with private equity, a lot of the focus has been on gender diversity.
So for me, the definition of diversity really depends, as Melissa said, on context of the client. So because we work across many different industries, including private equity, we sort of get a best practices and really broad view of what people consider diversity. And years ago, you couldn't really have the conversations. And now today, because I consider myself a diversity practitioner, I really encourage the conversations to be, so where is it that you feel that you're not, up to snuff and where you want to be? There are lots of companies. In fact, I had a call with a company the other day, anecdotally, that said, we are overloaded with female talent. We need to go in the opposite direction in order for us to have a more diverse perspective. And that's really important, because from all the studies that have been done with McKinsey and BCG and all these organizations that are showing that a more diverse group of people creates more innovation and ultimately gets a better ROI for the company. It doesn't mean that just because you're female, you're more diverse. It just depends on the organization. We also recruit folks from the military that have military background, that come from diversity of industry and thought, that may come from, outside the US with a different perspective. So each organization defines it a bit differently. Within the M&A world, I would say that female, certainly is a place where there's not a lot of, in a very male-dominated industry, so we focus a lot there. So each and every client is a little bit different.
And for us, diversity is actually a company value. It's one of our core values. It was one of the reasons I founded our organization, because I felt that, especially being a smaller and niche and boutique firm, that there is a way to do it different. Innovation, I think sometimes I define it as doing something differently, not necessarily doing something different. And so for us, diversity actually has been one of the core differentiators in terms of our service offering. So all of our team members are both, are gender diverse and ethnically diverse, but we also really focus on also age. And you hear a lot of the narrative today around millennials and Gen X and boomers, or whatever label you want to put on the various age demographics. You'll see all of those represented amongst our team members. Being a service-based business, diversity for us meant the need to be able to reflect the customers that we serve. Our clients come from all walks of life, and so we wanted and we need to, in order to be able to perform our services well, to empathize and understand them and reflect them. So for us, diversity is not just personal or ethnic or gender. It's also, as Julie was saying, diversity of thought, diversity of professional experience, age, geographic, and all of those things are equally as important to put into the melting pot of diversity to allow us to innovate.
I think it's so interesting that you say it's a core value for your business, because when we think about why diversity, why we're here at this panel today, why we're all passionate about it, there's a social justice question. This is important because it's the right thing to do. And then there's a value add question. It is better for our businesses. Can you, Dana, and others speak to your perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it's entirely about value add. It of course is the right thing to do, but when I founded our firm, one of the reasons I started my own business, frankly, was because I was kind of tired of beating my head against that proverbial ceiling or wall or whatever it was, working within private equity and corporate finance. So I just said, okay, well, I'm going to chart my own path. And so I knew from the beginning I wanted all of our decisions and how we operated to have diversity at top of mind. So one of the reasons it's a core value is it informs our decisions. The hiring decisions is, Julie well knows, you have to really relate those core values into who you're hiring and how you operate. And again, we've walked, having diversity allows us to empathize, and we've walked in the shoes of our clients. And because of that, we can generate more value for them. Because we're an M&A intermediary, it's all about exit value and valuation to a business. And so it's all about understanding where your client has been and where they want to go and who's the best person to put them in the hands with. If we hadn't done it ourselves, we wouldn't be as well-versed or prepared to be able to make that match happen, if you will. So that's why diversity is absolutely at the core of what we do. And frankly, has made us a little bit of a unicorn in the industry, because you'll look at our Meet the Team page and not one person looks alike and comes from a similar place or background. And that's purposeful and by design.
So that's also going to set you apart as an employer of choice. So this is what I tell my clients all the time. It is a value add and it is the right thing to do. And I started doing diversity recruiting long before it was fashionable to talk about it. I was, sat on the board of Howard University for 6 years and was the only Caucasian in a room giving a keynote speech. And so I really understand how people feel when they come from a different world. But what I say to my clients is this. It's not only just about the value, and I call it value add. I hate, I sort of hate that cultural fit because I feel like we're not hiring robots. But on the other side of it is when you look at the future generations that are going to kind of come through. And I was listening to the panel this morning talking about, the future generation and how do we retain, the people we've worked so hard, and especially women. I mean, one of the things that's so important is, like you just said, Dina, is when you look at your management team and I look like someone on your management team, I'm going to look at that opportunity as much more credible than when I look at an all male dominated organization where the board, where the management team, where everybody looks the same, and say to myself, how am I ever going to get to a place where I'm going to rise in trajectory in this organization? So not only is it the right thing to do, it's the way to do it for that value creation, not only for the business ROI, but also for maintaining the generations. And someone also talked about the fact that, the boomers are going to start retiring, and they are. I mean, I think that the COVID situation has really spurred a lot of people to think about, like, well, what am I doing with my life? And so we've seen a lot of people starting to step off because they can and they're going to do it. And you need to make sure that your organizations are so just diverse friendly to attract that next level of talent. I can't stress that enough.
And I do think, there's a lot of different, groups that are holding private equity accountable. We just went through a fundraise at the end of last year, and many of our LPs, right? This is a question that LPs are definitely holding private equity accountable to. The LPs themselves are very diverse. A lot of females, within those organizations, and so that those are just, it is it has to move from the idea of social justice to how that's going to be, very business critical. And Julie, I love your term, of the value add. I think also, just in different management teams and presentations. With the firm that I was with prior to GTCR, I was in a management meeting, and it was a healthcare organization, and across the table, the 4 senior executives, CEO, COO, medical director, and CFO, were all female. And, we were sitting on the other side of the table, and it was myself and 3 of my male colleagues. And after the meeting, one of my colleagues said to me, Melissa, that was the strangest meeting I had ever been in. And I said, really? How so? And he said, it didn't matter which one of us asked the question, they all answered to you. And I just had to chuckle and say, welcome to my world, right? So it's very interesting as to those dynamics and how, that construct is changing, and how, Julie, as you said, we need to reflect the customers in private equity. We need to also reflect those investment opportunities.
It's excellent that you bring up the dynamics, because there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. You can focus on diversity by recruiting diverse candidates and expanding your candidate pool. And you can focus on diversity by making sure that those candidates have the right environment in which to welcome them when they're hired. Where do you guys begin, and how do you prioritize that?
That's a huge part of my conversation, because bringing a diverse candidate to an organization is just one small fraction of what diversity, recruitment, and engagement and belonging really talks about. So if you're not creating the environment where people can flourish, if you're not creating, and a lot of companies have, groups of different kinds of people in the organization. I see that more as isolating than I see it as inclusion. I think people have to get over the differences of diversity and embrace them. And I think that comes from the top down. And until that embracement is made, it's going to be very difficult for someone to come into an organization who comes, and I've experienced this every single day. I go through this with candidates who go into not only non-diverse environments, but non-diverse geographies. We're getting better because we're not relocating people as much as we used to, so people can stay in their environment. I think that's going to be a huge plus for organizations that are in sort of non-diverse communities. But I think it is the commitment of organizations to make sure that they bring people together, not separate them, embrace the differences of how they communicate, embrace the differences of what their backgrounds are, and whether that be, unconscious bias training, whether that be sensitivity training, that's the difference between just recruiting a diverse individual and having that kind of consultative conversation that is so important. And if we don't do that, we can bring the candidates all day long. They won't stay, they won't survive, they won't thrive. And then we'll have worked really hard to recruit the talent, and yet we can't retain them. And the retention aspect is clearly just as important, if not more so, as the attraction factor, if that makes sense.
I think it's a lot about to just surround, right, as we bring in any employee into, into our firm, into our portfolio companies, onto the boards, it is about very intentional onboarding and ensuring that person's success and making sure that they can have a fast path to productivity, and also feeling, very comfortable in the environment. And so that's something that we've really been, focused on, is how do we, get very, very intentional around that onboarding. And it's not a, it's not good for anybody to just have a, Darwinism approach, throw somebody in the organization and see if they, survive or not. It's really about, it's so hard to recruit the right talent. It's a competitive market. There's, excellent talent out there, to be able to be that talent magnet. And then, to lose that talent is, there's just a huge cost to the organization. So I think it really begins at, thinking about how is this person going to enter into that role, into that organization, and really putting a very, very thoughtful and intentional and formal process around that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and we also really focus on performance and measurement and expectations. It sounds fairly, kind of HR basic 101. But what I was always frustrated, frankly, about as a woman, is my goals were sometimes different. I wasn't supported as much to get and achieve those things, and I just, it was a lot harder to forge that way forward. So in our culture, when we bring new people on, we make it very clear everybody gets the same tools, the same support, the same opportunities. We're in deal making, so we're constantly moving on to the next deal. And so everyone, we either all win or we're not. And it's very much a collaborative team environment. And by kind of forcing all the diverse people to work together on individual projects and transactions, they learn how to work with one another, and it's not, they're not forced to change to be like anyone else. They all bring their unique talents, and they're all supported, and it's all fostered. And we've had some situations where we've had, an employee say, it was a woman who came to me and said, well, gosh, I'm working with this gentleman, and it's just, we're just kind of butting heads. And I smiled and I said, yes, and you're two very different personalities. I said, so as long as there's not something that's like inherently bad or wrong here, you have to learn to work together, because, we're not going to have, everyone that's like her and or everyone that's like him. And because that's what makes us good. And actually the two of them pushing on one another brought better ideas, better solutions, so it's really, everybody's given the same tool set. Everybody's given the same, our compensation structure is exactly the same, and we're very transparent about it. So I think when employees feel supported and everything's transparent, they don't feel as if anything's being hidden or is different for them, and they see the opportunity and then the action follows it, that's where it starts to foster that true culture, and diversity starts to become a part of who you are, and not something that's necessarily talked about. At least that's how we do it.
it has to be woven into the DNA. It can't be something you do as a tactical approach. It has to be strategic. You know, as I started my firm 18 years ago, everyone in my company is diverse. And even down to the most junior person in the organization who gets a seat at the table during staff meetings to voice their opinion. Their opinion may not be the one that we end up ultimately going with. And it's not necessarily democracy where we vote on everything. But at the end of the day, everybody has a voice. And what you were saying, Dina, is very, very important. People are going to come from different perspectives, and you have to value that. And you never know where that gem or that pearl of wisdom comes from somebody that it would be just totally unexpected. And you sometimes sit back as a leader and go, wow, I hadn't thought about that. And that's where the innovation comes in. And so that's why it comes from the top down. And it's really fantastic when you talk about creating it as an organic situation as opposed to a tactic.
One of the things I'm noticing about all four of us really is that we have the privilege of creating the values, setting the culture, setting the tone, and creating a little bit of a top-down mandate or perspective around this. If somebody in our audience were listening and they might be managing a team within the context of a broader culture, do you have tactics or best practices for how they can promote diversity, even if they're not the leader of the organization?
I would say some of the same themes that we're talking about, you can do, you know, in your sphere of control. And just lead with that confidence and communicate your whys to people. I think one of the things when I was within, you know, much larger organizations, we as women tend to not self-promote. It's just kind of an inherent thing in our DNA. And I think if you do more of that and you tell folks like what you're intentionally doing and it'll come through in the productivity as well. You know, your team will run well by virtue of that. So tactically, some of the things I was just mentioning about, you know, fostering specific teamwork, you know, maybe pairing a couple of individuals who might be disparate in their backgrounds, you know, have them work on something together, because you learn and start to understand and change happens in those moments. So I said, you know, maybe pair up some folks like that and communicate out to your superiors and your peers what you're doing and why, and it'll, you know, even just informally kind of water cooler-wise, it'll find its way around, and then it'll catch the ear of someone, and then maybe it does become something that's more organizationally implemented. But, you know, start small and start with what you can control and apply some of the things we've been talking about today. And I think you can navigate your way there. At the very least, it makes your day-to-day easier and better, just personally.
I think there has to be that, you know, champion, you know, in sponsorship from the top. But if it's all from the top, right, then you're losing that organic and really the emotional tie, you know, to it. And so it can't, you know, just be this top down type of initiative or you know, mandate. And, you know, that's a lot about what we talk about. And I think that, you know, we talk a lot about how are we promoting and communicating what's going on in the organization to then give more, you know, rise to these things that are happening, right? That nobody's doing to say, look at me, I'm doing this. But it's really to, you know, to make it, you know, to kind of, I don't know if this is a bad term, but, you know, to give permission, right, to the organization to experiment with those things and to shine the light on it. So, you know, our town hall meetings, you know, we're discussing, you know, we're shining a light, right, on some of those examples. If we participate, you know, in industry events and we have some of our folks, you know, that are on panels, right, we want to give that recognition. And especially in this COVID environment, you know, with our firm town halls, with, you know, a newsletter that goes out and highlights different things, always trying to, you know, ensure that we are promoting those, you know, small little victories and actions that are happening in the organization. And then I think it just, you know, starts to gain a lot of momentum from there. So, you know, it has to be that organic bottoms up. But, you know, knowing that it's, you know, very much recognized and encouraged from the top down as well.
A secondary question is, if you're joining a firm that may not have that top-down or that inherent culture that values all participants, all members of the community, do you beat them or do you join them? And what I mean by that is, do you learn to play golf and masculinize your terminology, your code switch to fit into the dominant culture's language? Or do you stand out and be your own self and try to change the culture that way?
My experience in the past has, I'm terrible at golf, and I have a set of clubs, and I certainly gave it a shot, pun intended, but I failed. It was not good. So so what I would try to do is find, we're all humans. So there have to be other likes that can so like, hey, listen, I like cocktails too, rather than having them on the golf course, let's meet at the bar, or, we try to come up with alternative things. And sometimes, frankly, I would just kind of set the expectation, like, listen, I'm not playing golf today. So whatever you guys are going to discuss on the links today, whatever business takes place needs to be repeated to me when it comes back. And I would just kind of set the expectation. And I also would find myself asking why, and not in a judgmental way, but just I'm big on, you'll hear me talk about empathy a lot. So I may not want to play golf, but I'll ask why, what are we trying to achieve here? Can we, and if I can understand it, then we can all kind of maybe solution something that fits a little bit better for everybody, and it still checks all the boxes and still has the fun, social component to it, perhaps, or even if not so much like the social norms, but even just within the day-to-day operating of the organization, I would ask why. Someone would say, this is the way that it is, and then I would just, could you tell me more about that? And maybe give me the background on kind of why we've done it this way, and have you ever thought about this? And so, as someone mentioned earlier, sometimes the more you ask, it kind of sparks thought, and like, well, I guess I never really thought about it. And so it's little things like that. That's how it always worked for me. I think one of the key pieces of diversity is we all need to be more empathetic. That, gentlemen, not every event has to be a golf tournament. When we were prepping for this panel, I talked about, I get invited to hundreds of golf tournaments here. I haven't played in one. It's not that I don't want to attend and network with those folks. I absolutely do. It's just, that's not the forum for me. And I know that it's not going to be a productive use of my time. And I'm not going to get as much out of it. So I'd rather do something else. And I think, but that doesn't mean we all go to the spa, because I bet they don't want to do that either. Right. Yeah. So it's just about finding some commonality someplace. And in those events, thank you for the invitation. I can't make it, but you know what? I'd love to have dinner in 2 weeks, or let's get our teams together in some other forum and just try to, acknowledge and thank, but maybe pivot and do something slightly differently.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge we have 2 minutes and there's a question from the audience I want to address, but Julie, you look like you have something you really want to say on this topic.
No. I agree with Tina. Unfortunately, I'm one of the people that succumbed to sort of joining them, because I learned to play golf 14 years ago just because it was really good for business, and I'm in a male-dominated, lot of businesses, and so I felt like that was where I could get a lot of value. So I did it. I mean, it's hard, and I'm usually one of the few women that are out there, but it doesn't bother me. I just think, but I agree with you that sometimes you have to. I think sometimes you beat them and sometimes you join them. And I think it just makes a difference on what the actual, it's situational, just like leadership. You form that based upon what the situation is. And so I don't think anything has to be hard and fast. And I don't think you have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. I think authenticity is the most important thing that you can do and bring.
Yeah. And I think it's about finding those connection points. I mean, that's what the human interaction is. And if I know somebody likes sports, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to tuck that away. I'm going to ask them about their sports team, even if I don't really have, all the stats to contribute to it. But I did grow up playing golf, and I can beat half the guys that I play with. So
nice.
You go, girl.
Yes.
So Willette asks, when promoting and implementing diversity, do you find it is less difficult to identify and support women's initiatives than initiatives that support racial minorities? And
I'm gonna jump in here for a second, if you don't mind, because I've done both. And what I would say is, We have the Women in Finance, the Healthcare Business Women's Association, the Women in Communications. It's not mutually exclusive to race or anything else. It's all about women. And so I think it is easier for people to identify and support those initiatives, but I think that's changing. And I think people are making more of an effort to say, look, we are all about inclusiveness, and that includes women that come from diverse backgrounds or people that come from diverse backgrounds. And I think it is really important. And I'm having those kinds of conversations every day. So I do think it's changing. But it was more or less, initially much easier to identify the women's initiatives. But now it's definitely becoming broader. I see it happening.
That's such an important question, and I wish we could give it more time and airtime because it's just so critical. So thank you, Willette, for asking that. And thank everyone for participating. You guys were fabulous panelists, and we appreciate all the audience members who tuned in. And we're available for questions on LinkedIn, or you can find us elsewhere.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.